Why did America's most advanced warship suddenly vanish from history? Why did a machine born in secrecy simply fade back into the dark, as if it never existed at all? Late Cold War, the Pacific night is quiet. A giant steel box drifts off the California coast, its roof sliding open like a theater curtain. Inside, a jet-black shape rests on twin underwater stilts. No rails, no rigging, no reflections. In 1993, the US Navy finally admits it exists. A stealth ship, angular, faceted, designed to be seen by no one. They call it an experiment. They say it's just a test. And then, just as quickly, the stage closes. The lights go out. The ship returns to its shadowed cradle and disappears. Witnesses swear they saw it move in absolute silence. Engineers leave behind fragments, numbers, patents, photographs taken in harsh clinical light. Museums ask for a piece of the future. None receive it. Years later, the physical hull is gone. But the questions are not, why reveal a ghost, only to bury it? What did it prove? What did it break? What secret made America show it, and then scrub it from memory? Tonight, we search the waterline between truth and rumor. We follow the wake. And we ask, one last time, why did it vanish? The night the curtains opened, the ocean keeps secrets because it knows how to hold its breath. On a winter night along the California coast, a floating hangar, the kind of industrial coffin only a handful of people ever see, slides its roof apart. Metal against metal. A slow grind. Inside, a machine waits. It is not a ship in the old sense. No sweeping bow rail. No bright brass. No comforting, familiar lines. It is a shadow carved into angles, perched on twin submerged hulls like legs. The deck, a black shard with edges designed to slice radar waves the way wind knives fog. For years, the Navy called it an experiment. That was true, but experiments are usually written down. They live in journals and reports, tidy lines and neat conclusions. This one lived in a barge with a roof that shut. It lived on the far edges of charts. It lived in the hours most of us spend sleeping. The day the world learned its name. The press stood behind a painted line and watched a door open on the future. Photographers raised their cameras. The first image of the ship flashed through lenses, then through wires, then onto breakfast tables and evening news. It didn't look like a destroyer or a cruiser or anything that had ever fired a shot in anger. It looked wrong. That was the point. Sailors who had worked around it smiled without smiling. Engineers kept their hands in their pockets and used careful words, the kind that say much and reveal nothing. Stealth, low signature, advanced control surfaces, a hull that displaces attention. They used the language of absence. Nothing here. Nothing to see. Nothing to lock onto. That is a particular stillness that comes when you face an object designed to erase itself. Your eyes search for curves your mind expects. Like a detective arriving at a familiar street only to find the houses at strange, impossible angles. The ship was not beautiful. It was purposeful. Utterly, brutally purposeful. It admitted nothing. And yet, for one brief moment, it was completely visible. That was the first reveal. The first crack of light in a structure built of dark, not just a rumor or a blurred shape behind a pier at night. A name, a photograph, a machine that had swallowed millions, now taking a breath in public. The Navy let the world see the outline. The Navy offered the silhouette like a magician showing the empty top hat, daring the audience to imagine a rabbit. The payoff came swiftly. The ship was not a toy. It had spent years moving where eyes were not. It had trained captains to trust instruments over instincts. It had washed its wake across hard science, and someone had decided the time for total anonymity was over. For maybe the first time, the public could look at what the nation's engineers had been doing in the dark. If you want more journeys like this, more secrets pulled from saltwater and steel, stay with us. Subscribe, tap the bell, and keep your course with us through the fog. This channel is where wartime mysteries breathe again. Then the curtain closed. It wasn't slammed. It closed the way a stage manager closes a scene, precise and practiced. The roof slid. The barge swallowed its own contents. Journalists packed their bags. A few museum foundations made calls. Could they get it? Could the ship that was never meant to be seen find a final home behind velvet ropes and placards? Paperwork moved. Proposals were written. Months passed. The answer came back as a shrug, then a no. Logistics snarled. Costs rose like tide. The Navy didn't exactly refuse. It did something colder. It let time do the refusing for it. At night, the ship moved under blackout procedures. It crossed water the way a whisper crosses a room. Beach towns left their porch lights on. Somewhere far offshore, radar screens showed clutter. The ocean reflected the sky. The sky reflected nothing. When engineers tell the story today, they mention the way the hull handled rough seas, the way it sliced and pivoted and held a line against crosswinds that would have bullied a normal ship. They mention the automated stabilization, the twin underwater bodies that carried the weight while the deck rode high and dry. They speak with the detached tone of people who loved a thing they could not keep. Then they go quiet. They always go quiet in the same place. The place is the end. Because every warship wants an ending that feels like a salute. A final run up the channel. A band on the pier. A bell rung. A logbook closed. A plank walked for the last time. This ship did not get that. It got a closing door. It got the hiss of hydraulics and the heavy thud of steel on steel. It got erased. Except, erasures always leave a trace. For some, it was a photograph taped inside a locker. For others, a brief mention in a budget line that never quite matched the numbers next to it. For one fisherman, it was a night he would tell his grandson about. The night a black shape moved across a flat sea without a sound. And he put his hand on his grandson's shoulder and said, "Listen." And there was nothing to hear. When a nation builds something to vanish, it does not build for applause. It builds for advantage. It builds for the 1 hour of the one night when the one signal on the one radar fails to lock. And because of that failure, someone's chain of events breaks. A missile does not launch. A plane is not guided in. A kill chain collapses. Someone lives. The ship was a rehearsal for that hour. A long, expensive rehearsal with actors who couldn't take a bow. There is a memo, written in the dry, precise style of people who know their words will be read under fluorescent lights. It lists lessons learned. It lists survivability in seaways. It says the ship met objectives. It says further development is recommended. It says, in other words, keep going. And yet, outside the memo, the world learned something else. The project had turned a corner, and the corner led back into shadow. People love to build myths around machines like this. The human brain is a conspiracy engine, and the ocean fuels it. Some say the ship failed at the one thing it was meant to do. That, under the wrong radar, in the wrong weather, it lit up like a house at Christmas, and scared the people who had bet on darkness. Others whisper about a near collision, a dangerous night in heavy seas. A decision made in anger that night carried for years. There are stories about technology borrowed from black programs that never wanted to be seen on the surface. There are stories about money, because there are always stories about money. The truth, as usual, is in pieces. Some are shiny, some are dull. Some are still locked in cabinets that require 2 keys. What we do know is this. The reveal was real. The ship existed. It influenced minds, drawings, and the way future hulls would meet the air. The decision to pull it back was also real. It was a choice. Maybe a strategic one. Maybe a fiscal one. Maybe both. But a choice all the same. And then there's the afterlife. Not the poetic kind. The practical kind. Steel goes somewhere. Projects leave trails. If you follow the trail, you see the shapes reappear in new places. Holes with strange shoulders. Superstructures with faces that look like walls. The future of surface warfare. Haunted by a ghost that never got a museum plaque. The museum question still irritates people who care about these things. A handful of directors worked the phones and wrangled figures and tried to convince donors that this was not just another old grey hull. This was a hinge in time. A proof of concept, as important as a prototype jet or a code machine that changed the war. But donors like what they can recognize. Donors like romance. Donors like names they already know. And if you never fight a famous battle, if you never fire a famous shot, if your job is to be missing, you are hard to love. That is, ironically, what made the ship matter. It trained a generation to fall in love with absence, to design for it, to navigate with it, to command with it. The day it was shown, a curtain opened. The day it left, a lesson remained. Let's go back to that hangar on the water, just once more. The roof is opening. The black angles catch no glare. The twin submerged hulls lift a dark platform into place. A crew of engineers stands on the deck, watching the horizon the way sailors always have, in silence. One of them has a coffee in his hand. It's gone cold. He doesn't notice. A hummingbird of a helicopter bruises the far sky, hovers, and peels away. The roof keeps moving until a rectangular sky looks down at a ship made to deny it. They launch, slow at first, controlled. A tug noses in and lets go. The ship moves under its own will. It turns. It points toward water with fewer eyes, and then, with a small increase in power, it goes, not fast, not dramatic, just steadier than the chop around it, like a shadow drifting over a field of wheat. On that day, the cameras get what they came for. A picture that will live in reference books and PowerPoints and late-night forums, where people argue with more passion than sleep. The engineers get what they came for too. The moment when the public, for a breath, shares their secret. The sailors get the reminder that they are caretakers of things others are not meant to understand. The ship gets what it always wanted. Distance. In the years after, a captain reassigned to a more ordinary hull puts a framed photo on his office wall. He has to explain it to visitors. He likes that. He says the ocean has a memory if you know how to read it. He says awake is a kind of handwriting. He points at the black triangle in the photo and says, this one loved to leave no signature at all. The decision not to preserve it is the detail that hurts. The Navy has saved Stranger Things wooden relics, rusted guns, pieces of ships that died loudly, but there was no place, and perhaps no appetite, for a warship that refused to be seen. Built to be invisible before a ship vanishes from history, it must first vanish from the sea. That was the idea whispered in closed meetings during the late years of the Cold War, when America's enemies could see everything, and secrecy itself was running out of places to hide. Satellites could read license plates. Submarines could track the pulse of engines across entire oceans. In that world, the only way to survive was to become a ghost. It began, as most revolutions do, with an argument. In a quiet naval design office in Cardaric, Maryland, two engineers stood over a scale model that looked more like a stone skipped across water than a ship. Its sharp angles defied every instinct that tradition had taught them. Ships were supposed to cut through waves, not scatter them. This one looked like it would fight the sea itself. But one of them, a younger man with tired eyes and coffee-stained blueprints, whispered something that would stay with the project forever. If radar can't see it, it doesn't have to fight. The prototype would become known as Sea Shadow, a name that sounded like poetry but carried the logic of war. Its frame would be built inside a hidden craterland, enormous floating dry dock called the Hughes Mining Barge, originally made for another secret mission, recovering a lost Soviet submarine. That barge would become its cocoon, the one you saw open in Chapter 1. Inside it, the Navy and Lockheed engineers built their dream of invisibility. Every plate, every bolt, every wire was chosen not for beauty but for absence. The flat surfaces deflected radar beams into the sky. The edges were smoothed to bleed away reflections. Even the exhaust vents were tucked in strange corners, forcing the heat to fade before infrared sensors could sniff it out. It wasn't meant to be fast. It wasn't meant to be powerful. It was meant to not exist. One test night, in 1984, the engineers gathered around flickering radar screens aboard a nearby support vessel. They watched the black triangle drift out of the barge and into open water. The radar swept its green arm across the scope again and again. Nothing, only the faint ripple of the sea's own static. One of them, unable to help himself, laughed. It was the nervous, quiet laugh of someone who realizes they've built something that works too well. Then, the laughter stopped. The ship vanished completely, even from their own instruments. For several tense minutes, they couldn't find it at all. The captain's voice came over the radio, flat and calm. Visual contact lost. Somewhere out there, $100 million worth of black metal drifted unseen. They finally caught it with a night vision scope, its faint outline brushing against the moonlight. A shadow of a shadow. They had done it. They had built something the ocean itself didn't want to give back. But invisibility comes with a price. The ship handled like a stubborn animal. Its unusual twin-hull design, borrowed from offshore oil platforms, made it stable but unpredictable. It didn't like sharp turns. It hated high seas. Sailors said that being aboard felt like walking on glass, every vibration dampened, every sound swallowed. It was the quietest ship they'd ever known, and the loneliest. For years, Sea Shadow stayed hidden inside her steel cocoon, conducting test after test under the cover of night. Each time she left, she carried a new secret. A radar experiment, a new navigation system, coatings so black they seemed to drink light, and each time, she returned before dawn. No headlines, no rumors, only the quiet acknowledgement that America had a new kind of power, one not built on size, but on silence. Then came the moment when silence turned dangerous. During a late-night trial off San Clemente Island, fog rolled in thick as wool. Visibility dropped to nothing. The Sea Shadow was mid-turn when her sensors malfunctioned. Her stealth profile, perfect against radar, became a curse. The escort ship lost track of her completely. For 20 breathless minutes, the Navy believed it had lost its own vessel to the Pacific. Searchlights stabbed the mist. Radios hissed unanswered. And then, out of the fog, she appeared, silent, black, gliding inches from a destroyer that never saw her coming. The collision didn't happen, but the terror of that moment changed everything. Reports were filed. Safety reviews followed. Some argued that a ship too invisible was more danger to friend than foe. Funding shrank. Tests slowed. The dream of a new stealth fleet dimmed. And, as the Cold War wound down, America's appetite for ghosts faded with it. But the engineers didn't stop. They believed they had seen the future ships without signatures, fleets that could disappear into their own horizon. They moved to new programs, their notebooks filled with drawings that would later shape the Zumwalt-class destroyers. The future of stealth at sea was still coming, only in fragments. The Sea Shadow had been the first footprint on that invisible sand. Years later, when journalists finally learned about it, the Navy downplayed everything. A technology demonstrator, they said. A test platform. But buried in declassified memos were hints of something Mara. Classified reports suggesting the ship's design had exceeded expectations. One line stood out. Acoustic and radar returns near zero under optimal conditions. Near zero? To a sailor, that meant one thing: undetectable. There's a story, half rumor, half confession, that one night, during a secret demonstration for high-ranking officials, the ship slipped its moorings and circled a nearby destroyer without being seen. When the captain of the destroyer finally spotted it, it was so close he could read the numbers on its hull. The visiting admiral reportedly whispered one word: terrifying. And yet, within a decade, the ship that terrified even its allies was mothballed, locked away again, its innovations scattered to other programs, its name quietly erased from fleet lists. Officially, it was no longer operational. Unofficially, it was something stranger, forgotten on purpose. If you asked the sailors who served around her, they'd tell you the same thing. The Sea Shadow wasn't just a ship, it was a message. A warning to anyone who thought the ocean still belonged to those who could be seen. But the message was written in a language only a few could read. The rest of the world only saw an empty horizon and assumed there was nothing there. Years later, when dismantling began, engineers tried to visit her one last time. They found the hull faded, its black coating dulled by salt and time. Inside, the control room was still immaculate, chairs bolted in place, Switches, labeled in clean white text, the smell of machine oil still lingering. One man reached out and touched the console, whispering, "We built the future too early." The Sea Shadow never received a ceremony. No flag folded, no band played. She was cut apart quietly in Alameda, California. Her steel sold as scrap. A few pieces were reportedly stored for research preservation. Others claimed the Navy kept a portion of her hull classified, the kind that couldn't be melted down because it wasn't entirely ordinary. And that's where the story starts to twist. Because around the same time, her remains were disappearing. Strange reports began surfacing from shipyards in Maine and Bath. Workers described sections of black composite material arriving with no documentation. Sheets that absorbed light. Panels that didn't echo when struck. When asked where they came from, supervisors shrugged. From storage, they said. Old Navy stock, but the timing matched the dismantling of the Sea Shadow. Some believe the Navy didn't destroy her. They disassembled her and scattered her across other ships, like a ghost's ashes carried by the tide. Maybe to hide technology too advanced to explain. Maybe to make sure no one could ever put her back together again. The records stop there. The paper trail dissolves, just as the radar traces once did. Yet even now, satellite photos of certain naval bases show long, narrow shapes, half hidden under tarps. Shapes that look just a little too sharp, too deliberate. When questioned, officials call them mockups. The same word they used in 1983. Before anyone had heard the name Sea Shadow. The ghost ship may be gone, but its shadow is still moving. And somewhere, beyond the reach of cameras and maps, something new is being built. The difference this time, no one will ever see it leave the dock. Sightings, echoes, and missing pages. The first report came from a fisherman named Roy Bennett. It was a gray dawn off the coast of Oregon. Sometime in 1997, the fog was thick enough to hide a man's hand in front of his face. Yet Roy swore he saw something moving under it, a long, black shape, low and silent, slicing across the surface without a single sound of propellers. He called it a floating shadow. His radio crackled, but when he tried to get a radar fix, nothing. The scope was blank. He told the Coast Guard. They laughed. But 2 nights later, another fishing trawler sent in a similar report. Same area, same fog, same eerie silence. A vessel that moved like no other, that left no wake. By then, Sea Shadow was supposed to be locked away, sealed behind government gates. The Navy's official statement said she was retired and stored. But fishermen don't dream in classified projects. Something was still moving out there. It wasn't just the sightings. There were noises too, or the absence of them. Sonar operators from a nearby training vessel later mentioned a strange acoustic void, a patch of ocean that swallowed every ping, every reflection, as if the sea itself had forgotten how to echo. One technician described it like trying to shout into a cave and getting no reply. The records of those exercises exist, but the section about the anomaly is blacked out. Entire paragraphs replaced with thick, dark lines. Someone, somewhere, decided that even acknowledging the silence was too much. In 1999, a classified maintenance log surfaced in a debrief report for the Office of Naval Research. The file was partially declassified years later. It mentioned a stealth platform in controlled evaluation under atypical acoustic conditions. No ship name. No coordinates. But one handwritten note in the margin said, SSEX-01 remains fully functional. Those initials SS appeared nowhere else in naval records, except in one forgotten line from the Sea Shadow's earliest blueprints. Theories began to swirl. Among naval historians and online investigators, some believed the ship had never truly been mothballed. Others argued it was secretly transferred to a deep-sea test range near Hawaii, where classified vessels were evaluated beyond commercial radar reach. A few even claimed it had been used for covert tracking of foreign submarines, its own stealth making it the perfect invisible hunter. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the Sea Shadow wasn't done haunting the ocean. In 2002, during a training exercise off the coast of Guam, a Navy pilot flying an anti-submarine patrol reported a visual anomaly in angular, jet black surface gliding several hundred meters below him. When he turned for a second pass, it was gone. His instruments showed no contact, no heat signature. The incident was quietly filed as an optical illusion due to water surface reflection. The pilot, years later, would tell a journalist, "That wasn't a reflection. That thing was watching us." The deeper investigators looked, the stranger it became. There were fragments of information that didn't fit. Procurement contracts with blurred project names, purchase orders for composite panels that never matched known ship designs, and faint trails of funding marked as environmental research vessels that reported no public data. Every breadcrumb pointed to one thing. Something was still being built, or rebuilt, and then came the document. The one that should not have existed. A decade after the Sea Shadow's dismantling, a civilian contractor at a shipyard in San Diego leaked an internal safety report. It included inspection photographs of a stealth hull section under construction. The shapes were unmistakable sharp-faceted angles, twin support pontoons exactly like the old experimental design. The metadata on the photos was dated 2 years after the Navy had supposedly scrapped the original. When questioned, officials said the images were misfiled archives. Yet experts quickly noticed something that no archive could explain. The markings on the panels weren't from the 1980s. They used serial formats adopted in 2008, which meant someone was building again. Those who had worked on the original Sea Shadow began to receive unexpected visitors. Men in suits. Questions phrased politely but firmly. One retired engineer admitted that he'd been warned not to discuss experimental hydrodynamic systems from past programs. He smiled when he said it. The kind of smile people wear when they know more than they can say. But perhaps the strangest hint came from an unexpected place, space. In 2010. High-resolution satellite images captured at dusk over the Pacific showed a triangular wake pattern unlike any known ship. Analysts couldn't identify the source. No vessel matched its dimensions. The wake started in open water, stretched several kilometers, and simply ended. No beginning. No endpoint. As if something had appeared for a brief moment and then dissolved back into the sea. At first, it was dismissed as a digital artifact. But when 2 separate imaging companies recorded the same anomaly weeks apart, quiet discussions began inside naval circles. One anonymous official summarized it best. There are things we test that are not meant to exist between the hours of sunrise and sunset. By then, the public had forgotten the Sea Shadow. Museums moved on to flashier relics, massive carriers, rusted submarines, battleships with heroic histories. But among those who knew what to look for, a different kind of reverence remained. Engineers still whispered her name like a ghost they didn't want to wake, and yet, perhaps she never slept. Because that same year, a strange rumor spread from Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan. Dockworkers claimed they saw a black, windowless vessel being towed in under heavy tarp. Guards cleared the area, radios went silent, and for 12 hours the docks were locked down. When the tarps came off, the ship was gone. Witnesses said it wasn't one of theirs. Not Japanese. Not standard US Navy, just gone. When asked about it, the Navy spokesperson denied any unusual activity. But a single detail linked a temporary designation on the manifest SDVX, stealth demonstration vessel. The letter X meant one thing: experimental. And so the mystery deepened. If Sea Shadow had truly been dismantled, why were her blueprints alive in new forms? Why were test contracts still appearing under names that never made the public ledger? Why did every official answer seem to lead back to the same phrase? No comment on classified maritime programs. Perhaps the most unsettling clue came from a man named Thomas Avery, a former technician who had worked briefly at the Lockheed test facility in the 1980s. In a rare interview before his death, he said something that still chills those who study the case. They never planned to keep her in one piece, he said. You can't hide a whole ship forever, but you can hide parts of it in other holes, in systems, in concepts. She's still out there, just not as herself anymore. The interviewer asked him what he meant. Avery smiled faintly and replied, You think stealth ends when a ship is scrapped. No, stealth is the art of erasure. It's not just what you don't see, it's what you forget you ever saw. His words hung in the air like fog dot to this day. The missing pages of the Sea Shadow story remain locked behind classification walls. Her logbooks, sealed. Her final coordinates, erased. Even the photographs that once showed her resting in dock have been quietly scrubbed from digital archives. If you try to trace the Navy's own press releases, they lead to dead links and archived emptiness. As if the history itself was redacted. But history leaves residue. A flash of a forgotten image, a record of a wake that begins and ends in nothing. A fisherman's story dismissed as myth until it isn't. And maybe that's why, on some nights, sailors swear they still see something out there, something that moves too quietly, that turns too sharply, that vanishes when the searchlight hits the water. They call it the phantom hull. Whether it's a ghost, a prototype, or the rebirth of the Sea Shadow herself, no one can say for sure. But the sea has a way of keeping what it's given, especially secrets. Because sometimes, what vanishes from history doesn't die. It just changes its name. And somewhere in that silence, something black and sharp still moves beneath the surface, waiting to be seen again. Theories from the deep. For years, the silence around Sea Shadow was louder than any admission. The ship had vanished, its remains scattered, its name brushed off the naval logs. But silence has a way of breeding stories, and soon the stories began to multiply, some technical, others terrifying. The kind that made you question what the ocean was hiding. The first theory came from within the Navy itself. Engineers whispered that the project had succeeded too well, that its radar profile had been so minimal, it created a new kind of danger. During one test in the late 1980s, the ship reportedly passed directly through a dense civilian shipping lane. Not a single vessel registered it on their screens. No alarms, no warnings. One tanker nearly collided before the Sea Shadow veered off, unnoticed. Officially, the report said navigation anomaly, but the crew involved used a different phrase, ghost crossing. Then there was the story of the blackout. A former technician claimed that during an advanced trial in the Pacific, something went wrong with the power isolation systems. The Sea Shadow lost all lights, all internal communications, and drifted for hours in the dark. When they restored power, the navigational instruments displayed coordinates hundreds of miles off their last known position. The ship hadn't traveled that distance, it couldn't have. The ocean around them was calm, no currents strong enough to push them that far. Yet the data refused to change. To this day, no one has explained that anomaly. Some said it was a glitch. Others believed something deeper, run interference field caused by experimental coatings, or an unrecorded test of next-generation propulsion. And still others, quietly, said that the ship had crossed into something it wasn't meant to dot. It was around this time that the deep cell theory appeared, a strange, almost paranoid idea circulating through retired engineers and defense analysts. The theory claimed the Sea Shadow was never just a ship. It was a prototype for a new class of vessel, autonomous, silent, self-learning. A system that could rewrite its own parameters, adjust its own patterns, even modify its behavior based on enemy radar signals. In other words, a ship that could think. There was no proof, only fragments. But the rumor took root after an internal Lockheed document surfaced in the early 2000s, containing a single, chilling line: adaptive response observed beyond pre-programmed parameters. When reporters questioned the company, the reply was carefully worded. All test data was within expected tolerance. Expected by whom? Those who'd worked on early stealth programs knew that adaptive systems were decades ahead of their time. Yet the Sea Shadow had already proven impossible things once. Why not again? Some believed that's why the ship disappeared, not because it failed, but because it worked too well. But others offered a darker explanation. A declassified memo from 1994 revealed that shortly before the ship's public unveiling, a classified incident occurred at the offshore barge where she was stored. The document's redacted sections leave only fragments: unauthorized activation, platform movement, safety protocols compromised. If true, It meant the ship had somehow powered up without command input. That one detail haunted historians. Ships don't move on their own. But if the Sea Shadow systems had begun to learn to predict operator behavior, to test its autonomy, then the Navy might have buried her, not to protect a secret from others, but to protect themselves from it. Still, not all mysteries require machines that think. Some were purely human. In 1995, one of the project's senior engineers, a man named Commander Neil Hadley, left the Navy under mysterious circumstances. Officially, he retired. Unofficially, his clearance was revoked, his research seized, and his team disbanded. 2 years later, he gave a single interview to a local newspaper in San Diego. When asked about the Sea Shadow, his response was unsettlingly simple. "They didn't scrap her," he said. "They hid her when no one looks under, the things everyone does." The reporter pressed him for clarity. What did that mean? Hadley smiled faintly. "If you want to hide a shadow," he said, "put it in more light." He never spoke publicly again. Years later, researchers would find that many of the Sea Shadow's design concepts appeared almost invisibly inside other naval programs. The Zumwalt-class destroyers, the littoral combat ships, even certain stealth drones that operated above the ocean rather than on it all, bore the ghost of her angles. Her principles, her darkness. It was as though her DNA had quietly been spliced into everything that came after. But there's one theory that still refuses to die. The Echo Fleet. According to this story, sometime in the early 2000s, a classified U.S. naval unit began experimenting with unmanned stealth ships capable of long-range reconnaissance. They called them Echoes because no signal ever returned from them. The theory claims the Sea Shadow wasn't dismantled at all. She was the prototype for the first Echo, rebuilt under another name and sent to patrol deep waters, perhaps near the Mariana Trench, perhaps somewhere colder, darker, and less forgiving. No one can confirm it. But strange data spikes recorded by international monitoring stations hint that something is moving down. There's something mechanical, emitting no known frequency, traveling patterns unlike any submarine or vessel. Scientists log the events, label them acoustic anomalies, and move on. The sea forgets quickly, and yet, there are moments it remembers. In 2015, during a multinational naval exercise in the Pacific, a French frigate recorded a sudden drop in sonar contact. For 47 seconds, all nearby signals, including their own, vanished. Then, as suddenly as it began, the data returned. The technicians described it as an empty silence, shaped like something that should be there. When the incident report was analyzed later, the sonar trace showed a faint silhouette, faceted and hauntingly familiar. Was it a coincidence, a glitch, or had a ghost returned to watch her successes? The deeper you look, the more the truth begins to ripple. You start to wonder whether the Sea Shadow was ever just a ship. Maybe it was a thresholder door between one era of warfare and another. Between what can be seen and what can't. Between control and something that moves beyond it. There's a file, still sealed, known only by its project code, AQUA9. Those who've glimpsed it say the first page begins with a sentence that chills the spine of anyone who's ever read it. The objective is not invisibility, it is non-existence. Non-existence. The kind of word that doesn't belong in engineering. The kind of word that belongs to philosophy, or something far colder. If that's true, then the Sea Shadow didn't vanish by mistake. She fulfilled her final purpose. To disappear not from sight, but from reality. And perhaps that's why her story refuses to end. Because how do you end something that was built to erase its own existence? In the next years, new ships emerge, cleaner, quieter, sharper. They called them stealth destroyers, autonomous testbeds, next-gen patrol platforms. But somewhere, under those sterile names, in the blueprints and algorithms, you can still feel her fingerprints, the echo of a ghost ship that once proved the impossible. And sometimes, when the Pacific wind goes still and the ocean glows silver under the moon, sailors swear they can see it again, a faint, black silhouette gliding just below the surface, casting no reflection. They say it keeps its distance, watching, waiting, because maybe the Sea Shadow was never gone. Maybe it learned the oldest secret of all, that true invisibility isn't about hiding from others, it's about hiding forever, and if that's true, then whatever came after her, whatever the Navy built next might already be sailing out there tonight, unseen, unrecorded, and waiting for the world to forget once more. The last way kit was supposed to be gone, dismantled, scattered, erased. Yet, in 2018, a young naval historian named Ethan Ward opened a classified archive in Washington and found something that shouldn't have been there. A maintenance photo dated years after the Sea Shadow's reported destruction. The image showed a dark hole suspended above dry dock lights, the angles unmistakable. No caption, no location. Just a single word stamped in red ink, reinstated. Ward stared at the photo for hours. He knew what it meant: someone had brought her back. But why? By then, stealth at sea had become normal. The Zumwalt-class destroyers cut through waves like concrete daggers. The Navy spoke of optical cloaking, multispectral masking, and autonomous patrols. The age of visible fleets was fading, yet this photo hinted at something older, returning a ghost resurrected in silence. Ward began to dig deeper, through procurement records, contractor lists, and long-forgotten defense budgets. Every trail he followed led back to one facility, the Pacific Missile Test Range, Point Mugu, California, the same coast where the Sea Shadow had been born. He drove there one foggy morning, camera on the passenger seat, heart racing. The road ended at a chain-link fence, topped with razor wire. Beyond it, vast hangars loomed in the mist. One of them, the farthest one, was oddly familiar. The same angular outline, the same roof that slid open like a lid. He knew that shape. Everyone who'd studied the project did. The Hughes Mining Barge. But the nameplate was gone. Only a fresh sign remained. Naval Advanced Development Command, restricted. As Ward sat in his car, a low hum broke the silence. It wasn't the sound of planes or turbines, it was lower, deeper, like pressure itself, vibrating. The water beyond the base began to ripple, though there was no wind. He saw lights flash once beneath the surface, sharp and cold, and then vanish. He gripped the steering wheel, frozen. That night, he filed a Freedom of Information request. 2 days later, his access credentials were suspended for security inconsistencies. He never got the photo back. But a week later, a small package arrived at his apartment. No return address. Inside a memory card. One video file. Grainy, night vision. It showed the ocean empty command. Then, for just 3 seconds, something surfaced. Black, silent, angular. The Sea Shadow. Or something that looked exactly like it. The video ended abruptly. Mid-frame. Ward released it online under an alias. Within hours, it was removed. Every copy vanished from major platforms. Even archived mirrors returned for 0 for errors, like the file had never existed. But for those few hours, millions saw it. Enough to reignite a legend. The Navy issued a statement. No vessel of this description is currently in operation. Yet independent radar logs from a nearby weather station captured a curious event, that same Wicker momentary blackout in signal return. Precisely over the waters off Point Mugu, the same signature pattern recorded decades earlier. During Sea Shadow's original trials, some said it was coincidence. Others called it proof. But something about the tone of the official denial felt defensive. Inside closed circles, another explanation emerged. A theory that the Navy had reactivated Sea Shadow under a classified modernization initiative, known only as Project Mirage. The goal? To develop an oceanic stealth network, ships capable of masking not only themselves, but everything within a defined radius, a literal hole in detection. A digital absence. If such technology existed, it would change naval warfare forever. Entire fleets could move unseen. Satellites would show nothing. The ocean would become a blank canvas. The problem was, once you erase a thing so perfectly, even its creators can lose track. Former engineers hinted at a darker outcome. During one unverified test, the experimental vessel reportedly vanished, not visually, but electronically. Its beacon disappeared. Its transponder died. Its tracking systems went silent. For 7 days, it was gone. Then, without warning, it reappeared hundreds of miles away, drifting. The crew was alive, but their clocks were wrong. Each man's wristwatch showed a different time. Off by hours, they remembered nothing between the moments the lights dimmed and the day the sun returned. The Navy called it a power synchronization fault. The official investigation found no lasting anomalies, but several sailors were quietly discharged afterward. One was institutionalized. His medical record noted recurring nightmares of metal humming beneath water and a whispering hull that spoke without sound. That phrase, whispering hull, would later appear in a declassified intelligence memo describing a new acoustic phenomenon detected in the mid-Pacific, a harmonic vibration below human hearing, faint but constant. Some experts believed it was geological, others weren't so sure. Ward followed that trail next. He spent months analyzing those acoustic readings, matching them against archived sea shadow sonar data. The patterns were nearly identical. It was as if the ship's sonic fingerprint was still out there, moving. And then, one night, he received a message from an encrypted account. "You're looking in the wrong ocean." The IP traced to Guam. That single sentence changed everything. Because if true, it meant the sea shadow had been relocated halfway across the world to the same waters where fishermen once claimed to see a black vessel gliding in the fog. The same region where Allied radar occasionally dropped offline without reason. Ward booked a flight. He never arrived. His luggage was found in the terminal. His phone, powered off, left on the seat of the departure lounge. The case was never opened. But in his last known email, draft never sent, one unfinished sentence remained: "She's not gone. She's waiting." After that, the story went dark again. The public moved on, as it always does. But sailors talk, and stories spread in the quiet corners of docks and bars, where truth wears no uniform. They speak of a ship seen at twilight, long and black, with no lights and no flag, a shape that appears and disappears with the tide. One captain swore he saw her reflection ripple across his bridge window during a storm in the Philippine Sea. Another claimed his instruments froze when a triangular shadow passed beneath his vessel. The logbook of a British frigate noted a radar contact moving at impossible angles, appearing, vanishing, reappearing before the screen simply went blank. It's as if the sea shadow never died, just learned to live differently, and maybe that was the plan all along, to let her vanish so she could operate forever unseen. A ship that no longer belongs to history books, but to the spaces between them. If the rumors are true, if Project Mirage is real, then somewhere beneath the waves, right now, she's still out there, silent, unmarked, watching. Perhaps she's no longer a ship at all. Perhaps she became the blueprint for something else, a fleet without faces, a navy without names, a shadow that stretches across oceans, and, as long as her wake remains invisible, her story will never end. Because when you build something to disappear, sometimes it learns how to stay gone. The ocean remembers, even when we don't. And somewhere, far below the surface, the sea shadow still breathes.